Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Odinic School of Mysteries. My name is Bear. Thank you so much for joining me today. I appreciate the fact you've taken the time to listen to me wherever it is that you're listening to me at. This is a podcast, so maybe you're on YouTube or maybe you're, I don't know, doing a backhoe somewhere in the back country. So I appreciate you, wanting to listen to what I have to say. Ages ago, like we're talking, I don't know, it feels like it's ages ago. I've only been doing this since April of this year. Um, so, so it's probably only just a few months, but it feels like it's been a long time. One of my viewers asked me to talk about the Masons in detail. I've mentioned them quite a bit in various times. And a lot of that is just because everyone is aware of the Masons, at least obliquely. They came out with that, I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 movies, the National Treasure, which is about the Masons and secret societies and that kind of thing. So, people are aware of them, so it makes a convenient reference point. So it makes it convenient to say, okay, so this is like that sort of thing. However, it's but I've never actually came out and actually just talked about them in any real detail way and trying to explain my opinions on them. And my opinions are fairly mixed. So here's the deal. The rule of thumb is in the mystery school culture. Everything has cultures, right? If you're a trucker, you have a trucking culture. If you're into sports, there's a sports culture. If you're a musician, there's a musician's culture. Everywhere there's a group of people who are interested in a certain thing. There's a very specific culture that surrounds it. This should come to no surprise to literally anybody who've actually taken some time to think about it. In the mystery school culture, it is just one of those unspoken acknowledgments that the general rule, it's not the case for all of it, but the unspoken rule is that if the general public is aware of your organization, chances are that organization is a sorting house, meaning it's a recruitment center in order to get people in the door and shuffled off into other specific areas. And this is one of the great tragedies I feel personally, and this is my personal opinion, of the Masons, is that they've taken a really steep fall in recent years. By Masons' own admission, by some of their own membership's own admission, is that they're no longer an esoteric organization, they're a boys' club. And that getting a 33rd degree isn't the achievement that it used to be. In fact, there is a number of 33rd degree Masons who don't have any idea about any of the true esoteric teachings of Freemasonry. It's just a religion. It's just another religion. And so basically it's a networking tool. So instead of learning the secret doctrines of all ages, you join the Masons, you meet some people, you get some good business connections, and you get a great job. So people get all woo about, like LeBron James showing off his, jewel encrusted 33rd degree Mason ring. I meant to say Shaq. I apologize. That doesn't mean anything to me. It doesn't mean anything to me. Sure, yeah, he's probably joined the Masons, but that doesn't mean at all that he knows anything, and that's really the great lie. And this is the lie with a lot of entertainment industry, is that they are very good at making people believe that they're involved in some great, epic, underground cult who knows all this secret knowledge because they plaster all this symbolism all over their shit. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means that they plastered symbolism all over their shit and they're really good at marketing themselves. There is a great amount of power to be gained by making people think that you are something bigger than you are. And it's not, the Masons are not the same organization that they used to be. Sitting on my desk right now is the book Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. It's a 900-page document. And it used to be that all Masons had to read that book. It was a required reading. It's not required anymore. There's just things like that it just, they have, I guess what I'm trying to say is that they have a lot of undue mystique surrounding them, and it is really regrettable that they've really fallen as far as that they have. And that really makes me sad. Because they're a bit like, in some ways, they're a bit like the Hells Angels, the biker club, where even if you're Hells Angels rider, a Hells Angels rival, or regardless of whether or not you even believe with their philosophy, everyone kind of goes off of what they're doing. They're kind of the trendsetter as far as biker clubs go. They're one of the first ones. They're the ones who kind of invented the fashion and all of that stuff. And so everyone kind of wants to be a part of that whole thing. And so they copy what the Hells Angels have done. And it's kind of the sort of the same way in the mystery school culture, I guess you could say, is that everyone kind of, because they're the biggest dog in town, people, whether or not they should or shouldn't do it, they kind of subconsciously kind of base their progress off of what the Masons have been doing. And that's really regrettable. And so it's, I'm really sad. I'm really sad about the Masons, actually, because, in a lot of ways I really look up to some of their thinkers. But with that said, they are definitely worthy. They're definitely worthy to talk about. So here's the deal. So there's such a thing as called a blind, and this is something that is worth thinking about. A blind is a mystery school tool that is used that's very common, and it's not a lie, but it is a misdirection. So the way a blind works is when you put an over amount of emphasis on certain information to encourage somebody to come to a wrong conclusion, and thus keeping the secrets. Right. It's one of the most, if you could have a book of classic mystery school tools, this would be like in the top 5 mystery school tools for keeping secrets. It's that ubiquitous, it's that common, and it is that pervasive. It's everywhere. And so when it comes to, say, their origin story, you'll notice that Masons have never claimed, have never said what their origin story actually is. Is people outside of the Masons who are interested in the mystique of the Masons and speculate about what their inner workings are like. Instead of actually just joining the damn organization, they want to look on the outside and go, ooh. It's a lot less work to not join. Anyway, I have opinions about that. But their origin story, at least what people claim, is that they came from the Templars. And, the Templars were around. They gained some secret knowledge. At least, okay, so this is the way the story goes. So the Templars were in the Holy Land. They found some secret object under the holy site in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount. And then they booked it out of there and went back to Europe. And so the Templars went from this tiny organization into this massive multinational organization, essentially speaking, at least in medieval terms. They were extremely wealthy, extremely powerful, and they became a mystery school in their own right. And you have to be, and not anyone could just join the Templars. You had to be royalty. You had to be the son of a lord or something like that. And that's how they got a lot of their wealth, is that in order to join, you had to give all your land, all your property, and everything to the Templars in order to join. And so they amassed quite a bit of wealth in a short amount of time. And then, so the way the story goes is that the Pope and the King were realizing that they're becoming too powerful, and they wanted to nix it in the bud and gain all their wealth and prestige. And so they gathered up on the legendary Friday the 13th. They gathered up all the Templars, and over the course of the next few years, they slowly roasted them in horrible, horrible ways. And never did find all their money. Their money just vanished. And a lot of that is because of a gross misunderstanding of what the Templars actually believed the treasure was. When we say treasure, we think, oh, you must mean gold. Well, it's true they probably had some gold laying around, but that wasn't the source of their treasure. So in the way the story goes, then after that, the Templars all kind of broke up, and some of them went to Scotland and formed the Church of I can't remember. Roslin. I think it's the Roslin Church in Scotland. And now for some reason it's escaping me. I think it's like the Roslin Church in Scotland. Don't quote me on that. That's embarrassing. I had it just a second ago too. And then some of them, then they fled to America and helped found America and all that good stuff. And then somewhere in there, somewhere between when they broke up and they came to America, they reformed and named themselves the Freemasons. And then they came to America and helped found America and all of that. So that is a very cool and very sexy story. That is a very sexy story. I don't know this for sure. I'm going to just preface this that I don't have any real inside information here, but coming from the mystery school system, this smells like a blind. This smells like a blind. This smells like the kind of story that an organization would allow to happen, because not only does it make them look super cool, but it gives them a lot of mystique and helps people, it encourages people to look in the wrong places. Let's just say that. If I was a betting man, and I would suggest that where the Masons actually did come from wasn't necessarily from the Templars, though I'm sure there were a few Templars who were involved in their formation. The Catholic Church was in the full-time business of burning anyone who had any kind of Gnostic idea. And Gnosticism simply just means, it comes from it's an old Latin word which means gnosis, or knowledge. So we get the word knowledge from. It's from the word Gnostic. And, they were burning witches. They were burning the old Christian sects that were still kicking around, which is why we had like the Albigensian Crusades in the Languedoc region of France. They're called the Cathars, which is a Gnostic sect that sprung up there in France. They were the first paper makers in Europe. They believed in extreme equality between men and women. They believed in free literacy. Everyone should get to go to school, and they were flourishing. And but their grave sin was that they were sharing knowledge freely, and that they believed that the Pope was the devil's agent on earth. And the Pope, of course, didn't like that, and then so he butchered them ruthlessly in very brutal fashion. In the most horrible ways you could ever think of to kill someone. They did that to everyone, men, women, and children. So if I was a betting man, I would say there was a lot of priesthoods and stragglers from the generations of butchery that came out of all of that kind of nonsense, and they all found themselves together working as stonemasons. So if you have a stonemasons guild, you have a lot of people who know each other. They kind of start to realize that a lot of them are part of some similar organizations, and I think if I was a betting man, I would say that that's probably more accurate. How the Masons actually came about was that you have all these stragglers from all these different mystery schools that the Catholic Church and the ruling classes of England and Europe in general were butchering and killing. You have these stragglers who are kind of sitting around realizing, oh shit, we all know this stuff. Which is really interesting, you find Jewish Kabbalism in Masonry. You find the Christian mysteries in Masonry. You find Egyptian philosophy in Masonry. You find Druid practices in Freemasonry. They all kind of came together, kind of reworked the philosophy, reworked the symbols a little bit, and came up with something new. And that is a less sexy, but more than likely more accurate version of how it happened. I'm sure there was some Templar influence in there, some Templar money floating around to help make it happen. I wouldn't doubt it. But to say that they were just strictly a Templar organization, I think is a little bit of an overreach, in my opinion. So, but that's kind of my opinion on that. So with that said, is that even though that they are an amalgamation of a lot of different thought, it doesn't mean that their stuff isn't any less powerful. It means that there's a lot of really good wisdom that went into building Masonry, even if later on it kind of became corrupted and destroyed and lost over time. Right. Even if like I said, I mentioned Albert Pike earlier. Some people love him, some people hate him. And regardless of what you think about the man, there's a lot of really good information in there. Whether or not you even believe it's even accurate, there's a lot of information in there. And the fact that they don't even bother reading him anymore should tell you a lot. Because he pretty much dedicated his life to the symbols of Freemasonry. And the Freemasons don't seem to be as dedicated to their own symbols as people even just 100 years ago. So, and that's a problem. That is a problem. So, what is the philosophy of Freemasonry? And this is kind of where it gets kind of fun. So, all mystery schools, and I hammer this home all the time. All mystery schools are based on dying god myths. All of them, without exception. All religions, for the most part, are based on dying god myths. Even Buddhism is based on that. The dying god, the person who suffers in the underworld until he achieves gnosis and reaches nirvana. It's they're all based on that. The ascension of man is what all religions and all mystery schools are based on. Typically speaking, a religion is an exoteric version of a mystery school. It's the watered down, milquetoast, given to the masses version of what the truth is. Yeah, for better or for worse, it is generally thought that most people can't handle the truth. They're not complicated enough. They can't think clearly enough. They don't have the ability to reason well enough. They're not morally grounded enough to really know the truth, the real truth. And so they're given a lot of watered down philosophy and told that so they're told in things that they can understand. That's very concrete. You have to believe this in a literal way, right? That's one thing. Here is a list of 10 things you should and shouldn't do. That's another thing. Attend church on Sundays, give us a bunch of money, and go for it. That's the stuff that's given to the everyday person. But the priest classes, and I'm not even talking about just like your local pastor. I'm talking about initiated priest classes in the highest echelons of these organizations, are the actual true initiates of the true religions. True religions is in quotes, by the way. If you can't see me, but I'm using air quotes here. And it's the same thing with Masonry. So you have the general milk toast distilled to all Masons general philosophy, and then you have the true mystery school initiates who actually really know the doctrine inside and out, who really know the secrets. That's a very, very small minority inside the school of Masonry. Like I said before, even most 33rd degree Masons don't know the true philosophy. They don't know the true mysteries of Freemasonry. And that's really sad. So the dying God myth. The dying God myth of Freemasonry is based on a guy by the name of Hiram Abiff. Hiram Abiff, for those of you who are biblically inclined, you'll remember, is a king that King Solomon, he was friends with King Solomon, and he gives King Solomon a bunch of materials. There we go. That's the word. He gives King Solomon a bunch of materials to help build Solomon's temple. Another curious thing, just a little off topic here. The Bible never actually specifies where King Solomon's real temple was. And that's important to remember. People assume, it's an assumption that it was in Jerusalem, but that is a grave assumption. Don't assume that. And we'll just leave that from there. Anyway, so they're dying God myths. So they take what's really common in mystery schools is that they'll take the exoteric story. So they'll take the story of, let's say, from the Bible, you have King Hiram who gives King Solomon all these materials. Then they'll tweak it. And so the way that the mystery school version of that goes, the Masonic version of that, is that Hiram Abiff is the master mason. He's the master craftsman. And so King Solomon is building this grand temple, and they need to figure out who is who and who is actually the skilled laborers and who is just general labor. So people are divided up into 3 sections. You have the interred apprentices, which is actually it's green language for the interred, as like you're interred in a coffin. But the entered apprentices, which is the first degree of Freemasonry. You have the please don't tell me I just lost it. Fellowcraft, which is the second degree of Freemason, and then you have the Master Mason. And now each ranking, each degree has a secret word that they're given so that everyone could tell who's who and who's supposed to work where. And the goal is to make sure that people don't share this. And that there's only just a very few people, very minute group who are actually the master masons. They get the best pay, they get the best work, they get the best hours, and there's a lot of things, a lot of benefits that come with being a master mason. And the way the legend works is that if you know the secret word of the master mason, you could banish demons, you could raise the dead, you could set the captives free, you could live forever, you can fly. There's all this stuff that comes from excuse me, comes from being a master mason. And so there's these groups, there's this so everyone wants to find out what this word is, because they think that if they could just figure out what the secret word of the master mason is, they could get all these benefits. And so there's these three gentlemen. They're called the Three Ruffians, and I'm probably going to get their names wrong here, but I think it's Jubilee, and Jubilum. It's just something like that. It's I think it's Jubilee. Is it Jubilee, Jubilah, and Jubilum? I don't know. It's something like that. I apologize. Apparently, I'm a lot more ill prepared for this episode than I was expecting to be. Anyway, Three Ruffians. And so Hiram is in the middle of the temple, and he's looking at the progress that's happening as they're building the Temple of Solomon. And it's late at night, and these three ruffians come in to try and, quote unquote, convince him to give them the secret word, and he won't do it. And so so then they proceed to murder him. And I'm probably going to get these little off too, and I apologize for that. They strike him in the chest with a ruler, then he turns and runs away, and then they strike him in the throat with the level, and then finally, as he turns to run from that towards the western wall of the temple, they hit him in the middle of the forehead with the sledge, and that murders him. And then they run off, having never learned what the secret word of the master mason was. And then so in the morning, Hiram Abiff's body is found, and everyone is sent out to try and raise the master mason, trying to raise him from the dead. So he's put in this coffin, and I'll put up a picture. If you're on YouTube, I'll put up a picture so you could see it. They put him in this coffin with all these symbols on it. And so everyone comes to try and raise him from the dead. So they bring in the entered apprentices. And they try and raise him from the dead, but they can't. And then they find, then the fellow crafts come in, and they try and raise Hiram from the dead, but they can't do it. They don't know the secret word of the master mason. They can't do it. They don't have the power to do it. So finally, after much searching, they find a master mason, and they bring in the master mason. And the master mason whispers in the ear of Hiram Abiff the secret word of the master mason, and up comes Hiram Abiff from the grave, being reborn, having been told the secret word. And that is the dying god myth of the Masons. Jesus, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been on a fast for 2 days, and I'm just a little fuzzy-headed. Anyway, so I'm living off of coffee. I'm on a coffee fast. Anyway, so that's the dying god myth of the master mason, but of Freemasonry in general. That's what that story is what their entire philosophy is based on. Just like how the dying god myth of the Norse mysteries is based on Odin hanging from the world tree and seeing the runes and rising again. Their dying god myth is the murder of Hiram Abiff and his subsequent resurrection upon hearing the word of wisdom, which is the secret word of the master mason. And which is kind of, but what the great interesting thing about this is that The secret word of the Master Mason is equilibrium. Is equilibrium. And this is what the genius of mystery school philosophy is, which I just can't get enough of, is that you have to have the way symbols are locked away, the way philosophy is locked away, is the way truth is locked away, is you have to have a key. There's a key and there's a door. Without the philosophy, without the knowledge of what the key is, you can't unlock the door. You can't unlock the philosophy for which the truth lies behind it. And so even if Hiram Abiff spilled the beans and told the three ruffians what the secret word is, if he just says, sure, I don't want to die, the word is equilibrium. What does that mean? Right? What does that mean? Can you raise the dead with that word? Well, not really. It's just a word. In the Kabbalion, one of the things that he says right out there at the beginning is that for those who don't have understanding, who don't have the wisdom to actually hear what I'm saying, all this is going to be words, words, words. And that is essentially the truth of it. Jesus says in the Bible, I don't remember, I feel like it's Luke, but maybe I'm wrong. He specifically says, there have been those who see, or how does it say? You could, I just lost it. It's basically he's saying you could hear but not understand, and you could see but not recognize the truth. Right? It's given to you. It's right in front of your face, but you don't have the wisdom to see it. It's all twisted around inside of your head. You're looking at it wrong. It's like those, those books. They're really popular in the 90s where it just looks like a nonsense picture, but you adjust your eyes a little bit and the picture pops out, like a sailboat pops out of the background. Same thing. It's just like that. You don't have the eyes to see it. I am going to pour myself some more coffee. So just simply knowing the word doesn't give you access to any of the benefits. There is a great deal of work that must be gained in order to actually be able to use any of this stuff. I've often talked about the key to the doors of the underworld in the Odinic mysteries, in the mysteries of Odin. The keys to the doors of the underworld, the thing that sets you free, and that gets you out of the underworld, that creates freedom in your life, and you're no longer a dead person, right? Do you remember what that key is? If you're listening to this on YouTube, you could probably go back and find it. I don't think I put it on the playlist to the podcast yet. But the key that unlocks the door of the underworld is 3, my name is unity. 3, my name is unity. Even if you take that phrase and you figure out the puzzle, you're not going to you're not going to buy yourself anything. Right? You're not going to buy yourself anything, because even just coming up with the correct answer isn't enough to actually do it. There is something that has to happen inside of you that changes everything, that allows you to actually do it. It's not like just a magic code. It's not like on the movies where they say alakazam and something, rabbit pops out of the ground, or I don't know. You know why they do in the movies where lightning comes out of their fingers. It's not like that. Just simply knowing the special words doesn't buy you anything. There's mental chemistry that has to happen inside your spirit in order to really release yourself from the confines of the underworld. And so, and that's really the this kind of the big crux of it, which is why you could have people who are 33-degree Masons who know all the fancy words, right? They know that secret word. They know the secret word of the Master Mason. They do, and it doesn't mean a goddamn thing. LeBron James could show his jewel-encrusted 33-degree Mason ring, and everyone could go, "Ooh, you're a 33-degree Mason. Oh, it's so amazing. Oh, you know the secret wisdom," and all bowing down before him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm pretty awesome." That doesn't mean anything. It doesn't. It doesn't mean a goddamn thing. Unless he understands the alchemy of it, unless he's been physically changed on the inside and understands it in the deepest way possible, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean anything. It's just words, words, words. Anyway. So, I want to get into the first degree tracing board. I'm going to talk about it just ever so briefly on this, just as an introduction, but in general, I want to get into this in a lot of detail in probably the next... sorry, hang on. I'm just trying to look it up for a reference here. I have it here on my computer. So we're going to go into it just for a little bit of detail, just because it's worth talking about in the context of the greater Masonic philosophy. But we're going to spend a lot of time in probably the next episode breaking this down. Okay. And so we'll talk about this, and we'll briefly talk about the other very famous symbol, I could tell I've been fasting because my brain keeps shutting off on me. The square and compass symbol. That's one of their most famous symbols. It has the big G in the middle of it. So we're going to cover these two things. They're some of their most famous symbols out there, and very briefly. And then next week we're going to talk about the first degree tracing board in a lot of detail. So if you are listening to this on the podcast, this would be a little bit more tricky simply because you can't actually look at it. I will do my best to include this in the album art on the front so you could see it. But it's probably not ideal. I'm going to have it on my website, and the link is in the description box below if you're listening to it on the podcast, and on YouTube as well. So you could take a look at it, or you could just Google first degree tracing board and you'll see it. So there is again a key, and maybe, I use this phrase a lot. Maybe it will do us some good to actually say what a key is. So a key is basically a symbol, but most of the time it's just a small phrase or word is what a key is. But there's a lot of shit that's kind of packed in there. A lot of philosophy to unpack inside of it. So it's essentially a symbol, but written in words. It's not always a word. Sometimes it's an object, like the pyramids of Giza, for example. The Great Pyramid is a key, is an example of something that isn't a physical, that isn't a word, but is a physical object. The mathematics and the relationships between the planet and where it's placed and all of that, all the mechanics of Earth, all those mathematics are all kind of locked inside the pyramid there. And so that's a good example of what a key would be if it wasn't written down in a small phrase. So it's not always a phrase, but most of the time, I would say like 90% of the time, a key is a phrase. Like I said just a minute ago, the key to the gate of the underworld of the Norse mysteries is 3. My name is unity. The key to raising the dead and of the Master Mason is equilibrium. Just knowing the answer to those things doesn't necessarily unlock the door for you. But there's so going back to what I was saying is that there's a key that almost all mystery schools use is some version of see the end from the beginning. See the end from the beginning. And there's a lot that goes into that. And so one of the first things that happen is when you first join a mystery school, typically, and this is the case with the mystery school I'm a part of, this is what they do in the Masons, is they give you all the information right off the bat, but they don't tell you that they have. It's all locked away in symbolism. Okay, so in our mystery school, it's all locked in the story of the dying god myth of Odin. We'll show you a picture of the world tree, of Odin hanging on the world tree, pierced by his spear, and all of that kind of stuff. Right? That's all locked into the entire profundity of the universe is locked into that story. Just like the story of Jesus. The entire profundity of the universe is locked in his dying god myth. The same thing is with the Norse mysteries, and this is what they do with the first degree tracing board in the Masonic mysteries. And so the first degree tracing board, written in symbols, is the entire story of the Masonic philosophy. So right off the bat, you see 3 pillars. That's you have the Joachim pillar, the Boaz pillar, and the Wisdom pillar. And so you'll see S. If you're looking at it right on face first, you're looking at an S on the pillar on the left hand side, a B in the pillar on the right hand side, and a W on the pillar in the middle. And then you see various symbols. You see a level, you see a ruler, you see a square. There is a symbol for gold laying on the floor. There's a checker. They're all sitting on top of a checkered floor. Yeah, these 2 squares, these 2 cubes in the background. You'll see one is neatly carved and straight, and the other is all jagged. Those are called ashlars. You have the uncut ashlar and the cut ashlar. Those both represent the unworked man who is jagged and uninitiated, and then you have the cut man, which is the straight and narrow, right? Who's been worked and molded and fit for use in the temple. And actually, it's worth stating right off the bat that this whole picture is a picture of the Temple of Solomon as they see it. And it's all in symbols here. There's a ladder that's going up to the sun, and then you have the 3 initiates standing on the ladder. There's a key that's hanging from the ladder between the 2nd and 3rd initiates. Above each pillar, you have above the Joachim pillar, which has the S on it. The S stands for strength. There is the sun above the Boaz pillar, which has the B on it, which also stands for beauty, which is the feminine pillar. Joachim is the male pillar. Boaz is the female pillar. And above her is the stars and the moon. And then above the wisdom pillar is the all-seeing eye with the rays coming out of it, and then the rays coming out of it. You'll notice, like on each side of this, there's directions. You have a south, a west, an east, and a north. That's really important. You realize very quickly that this is a map. And so, there's a lot that's going on here. And essentially, the So the quick version, because I don't want to get into all of this now, because I'm going to spend a lot of time on this on the next one. Basically, it's the story of Jacob's ladder, right? The bottom of it, the checkerboard floor, represents base consciousness. It's the checkerboard floor, the checkered life of the uninitiated man. It's the dualistic worldview of someone who isn't in equilibrium, who is out of balance, who is either black or they're white. There is no nuance, there is no centrality, there's nothing. They're all just broken apart. These are it represents the kind of guy who gets into bar fights all the time. He gets drunk and beats his wife and can't figure out why the cops keep showing up at his house. It's the guy who alienates everyone in his life and he can't figure out why everyone keeps picking on him. It's the guy who has all the money and all the wealth but is lonely. The guy who mistakes having sex with everything that moves as being a real man. It represents the woman who dates douchebags and can't figure out why her relationships never work out. It's that. This is what that represents. It's that interred spirit. Again, that's, remember the interred apprentice, the first, degree. That's what that represents. It's called green language. It's like wordplay. So the interred apprentice, the apprentice that is still in the grave, he hasn't risen to life yet. And that's what happens when you achieve the Master Mason. You're alive. You become Hiram Abiff, who's raised from the dead upon hearing the word of Gnosis. And then so you begin climbing this ladder. You have you have Jacob's ladder. You notice that the ladder is sitting on a book with the square and compass and the golden symbol. The symbol for gold is a circle with a dot in the middle. That's called a circumpunct. A circumpunct. So the ladder of knowledge, the ladder of Gnosis, is sitting on a book with the square and compass and the symbol for gold. And all of those represent knowledge and wisdom. So the way to get to heaven, essentially, is what they're saying, is rests on wisdom. And then you have the entered apprentice at the bottom. You have the fellowcraft in the middle. And between the fellowcraft and the Master Mason is the key. Remember the key, what we talked about, which is the word equilibrium. And upon gaining the key, they become the Master Mason and then enters the sun, the heavens, so to speak. The land of Gnosis, the land of the gods. Excuse me. And so, yeah, there's a lot going on here. And I wanted to at least just talk about it briefly to kind of get your feet wet and to kind of wet your whistle a little bit so you want more coming up next. And I also wanted to talk about the square and compass. I wanted to end with this one because it's their most famous symbols here. So the square and compass is you can look it up online. So I don't know how many of you are builders. So what a square does, for those of you who haven't grown up in construction or don't know how this stuff is, a square is basically a ruler that's kind of bent at a 90-degree angle. And what it does is it helps you find straight corners. And what a compass does is it helps you find circles. So in esoteric philosophy, it is said that things of the underworld are jagged and the things made from God are spherical. Things that grow naturally on Earth, trees, stars, rocks even, for the most part, not always, but, things that are rocks that are worn down by natural forces such as wind and rain and water. It all turns things into circles. Jagged things don't last long in nature. As they're transformed by the forces of God, all things become circles. Birds are circles, essentially. You know, they're round and long, so they can move through the air. So base consciousness is squares, which is why the symbol for Saturn, the god Saturn, is a cube, because he represents the base consciousness. He represents basically the things that come out of the lower brain, the lizard brain, or the Abdullah portion of the brain, which is the part of the brain that was right at the base, right at the top of the brainstem. It's that lowest function. The need to feed, the need to reproduce, the things that run your autonomics, fight or flight, these kind of things are all run off of that. And so the kind of person who's living in that state, that unthinking, reactionary, base consciousness state, is represented as a cube or as a square, right? So the square and compass, that bottom, that which you'll even notice is pointing downward, and a downward pointed, like you can even call it a spear, even in the Odinic mysteries, a downward pointed spear is a symbol of imbalance, right? You take a triangle, let's take an equilateral triangle, for example, and you set it on the ground, it's going to, upside down, it's just going to fall over, right? You push it wherever you want it. So if you're, say, a dark occultist, you want people to be downward pointed spears. You want them to be in a place where they're not balanced, where the shining point of gnosis is underground, it's put out, it can't stand up on its own, it needs the state in order to survive, it needs a power structure, which is exactly what people who want slavery want. They want to be the power structure, and they want you to be the slave. So that downward pointed square, that measuring tool, represents someone who's out of balance. It represents the base consciousness. The compass, on the other hand, the thing that makes circles, basically represents the neocortex, the left and right hemispheres of the brain that come together, and you'll notice there's a little circle up there at the very top where the two hands meet. And that's the pineal gland that rests in the middle. And when you're in equilibrium, and someone's in equilibrium, that pineal gland lights up. And there's a very biological reason for this. And what happens is, it can even take pictures of this phenomenon, and it's all over the internet, where when someone thinks, your brain physically lights up. There's actual electronic circuits in there that begin to fire and light up. And so if you're a thinking man, you're an enlightened man, right? If you're a thinking person, you're an enlightened person. And so that pineal gland actually has rods and cones on the inside of it, just like an eye does. It's not built like an eye because it's not trying to see the same thing that like an eye like your eyeball actually does. It's trying to see something different, but it picks up on that illumination that's inside the brain and reacts to it. So when it is said that your third eye opens up, when it's said that your pineal gland is activated, that's when you've reached enlightenment, and it's actually much harder to do than what you'd think. And there's a lot of things that they put fluoride in the water, which is a calcification agent. It likes to calcify soft tissue, and there's hundreds of images on the internet you could go find of people's pineal glands being calcified over. It's very disturbing. But that pineal gland is the organ that allows you to connect to the divine, essentially. When that is activated, you have divine. It allows you to connect it allows you to connect to the divine. It's that bridge. It's that the rainbow bridge of the Norse that gets you from the earth to to the sky. But you'll notice it's also a triangle and it's pointed upwards. And that's the symbol of, again, it's kind of like the symbol of the all-seeing eye, which is another very famous Masonic symbol, which you have the all-seeing eye, and then you have the triangle around it, the upward pointed equilateral triangle. And that's because, unlike the upside down equilateral triangle, if you sit it on the ground, it'll fall over. If you put an equilateral triangle on the ground, it doesn't. It has a strong foundation. You can push on it on either side. It's not going to go anywhere. It's in equilibrium. The things are arranged in such a way that the unification principle, the shining tip of the spear of Odin, is pointed upwards into the sky. Things that, in symbology, the things that are higher on the page are considered the most highest ideal possible, and the things that are lowest on the page is the lowest ideal possible. So if a pyramid's point is to the sky, when the unification principle is to the sky, that means that is the highest ideal that we're searching for. And that's why you have the unfinished pyramid that you see like on the dollar bill, for example, where you have the unfinished pyramid, and then above it is floating the all-seeing eye inside the equilateral triangle. And that's why that's there. It's that gnosis principle. It's in the sky. It's the thing that is attainable. But so the real question is whether or not that all-seeing eye is being lowered onto the pyramid or whether it's being removed. And that largely depends on which side of the fence you end up falling on. Whether you're trying to improve the world and try to bring Gnosis into the world and trying to set people free, or whether or not you're trying to remove Gnosis from the world and enslave humanity. And that is, that's the real question. So, I mean, these symbols are alive. It just depends on which person, who you are, and what your philosophy is on whether or not that is an actual something worth doing. Okay, sorry, I got off track. The G, like you'll notice on the square and compass symbol, there's a G in the middle. That G is called the generative principle. And there's a few words for this. You could call it the principle of care, the principle of care, the principle of wonder, or the generative principle. Basically, the way this works is that without enough care, nothing can be accomplished. That G is also represents, it could also be seen as the eye of Horus. Again, it's also like the pineal gland and the center of the mind. So really what you could look at is say that the square and compass is a symbol of the mind. It's a mind symbol. It's also a symbol for the physical brain itself. And so the G at the center is, you could say it's either God, it's the generative principle, it's the principle of care, it's the pineal gland. All these things are true at the same time. And that's why you need to have multidimensional thinking if we're going to ponder this stuff, because it is, you have to be able to hold several ideas at once in your head, because all these symbols represent many things at the same time. All esoteric symbology is a minimum of triform in nature. They represent a physical thing in the human body, because it is said that the human body is the symbol of symbols. It represents the mind and also represents the spirit. And it represents all three at the same time, because we are a creature of three. We're the third planet from the sun, third planet from Gnosis. We're in the third arm of the galaxy. We exist in 3 dimensions. And by 3 dimensions, we length with height, but we're also 3 dimensions in that we're body, mind, and spirit. And so Yeah, you have to. So each esoteric symbol, whether you're dealing with the spear of Gungnir, which is Odin's spear, whether you're dealing with Odin's all-seeing eye, or the world tree, or you're dealing with the Masonic philosophy, Masonic symbolism, it's all the same thing. It always represents three things at once. And so the G on the inside, could also represent gnosis. It represents all of those things. It's called the generative principle for a reason. Without that, there is no gaining of anything. So like for example, with care, for example, we'll just stick with that because it's just easiest, and I think it encompasses everything. If you don't have enough care, nothing can be done. Right? So let's say you're lazy. You're a lazy bum. You're just sitting on your couch. At some point, you're going to get hungry, or you have to pee. Right? At some point, the need to eat is going to overcome your laziness. At some point, you're like, okay, I'm getting too uncomfortable. I care more about eating than I do about being lazy. And then once that happens, you get up and create food. If you care enough about making change in the world, you're going to get up and create change in the world. Without that principle of care, without caring enough, without that love principle, there is nothing that can't be, there's nothing that will be done. You'll just sit and do nothing. Right. Even if you have a very shitty job, you care more about feeding your family than you do about, than you do with your own comfort. So you keep going to the same horrible job day after day because it's necessary, and you care more about feeding your family than you do about your own comfort. And there's ways around that. There's definitely ways around that. If you decide that you want to do something you want to do, that you care about, and feed your family at the same time, even if it's for less pay, you're totally going to do that instead. Right. But that's what the generative principle is. It's the creative principle. It's the God principle. It's that John 3:16 principle. For God so loved the world that he sent his only begotten Son, so that none shall perish but shall have eternal life. It's that I care more. That's God saying, I care more about saving humanity than I do about keeping my son alive. I'm willing to sacrifice this other thing that I care about in order to get something out of it. There is no creation without sacrifice. It's an old principle that is very often misinterpreted. That there is no creation without sacrifice. Something has to be given up in order to get something else. Always. That's why you go to work. You're sacrificing your life. It's called going to work is called the principle of the living sacrifice. You go to work, you sacrifice, you have X amount of time in the world, right, that you're here, that you can make effectual change in this world, and you are snipping out a huge section of that to go to a job, to work an hourly wage, to get a certain amount of pay out of it. You're sacrificing yourself in order to gain that. On the flip side, right, if you want to be a master of mysteries, you want to know the secret wisdom, you want to know all this philosophy, and you want to figure out what the true meaning of the word of the Master Mason is. You want to do all of this stuff. That requires a considerable amount of time and energy in order to achieve that. In the book, The Emerald Tablets of Thoth, he suggests that in order to even arrive at a priesthood requires schooling of at least 54 years. 54. In order to reach high priesthood. So the question is, how long have you been at it? You know? So, that's important to remember. You know, there's nothing that gets to be gained without sacrifice, and that's that God principle. It's that principle of care. You in order to we're sticking with being the lazy on the couch, for example, you have to be willing to sacrifice your comfort in sitting on the couch in order to achieve nourishment, to get the food into your body. You have to sacrifice one thing in order to gain the other. But people always misinterpret that, and they say, okay, well, that means I have to go kill a cat. You know, I have to go sacrifice a baby. And that's not what this means. That's not what this symbol means. It's not what this philosophy means. That whole bloody sacrifice thing is a new invention that came out through a chaos god, the god of Saturn. It's an underworld misunderstanding of a holy principle. It's an underworld misunderstanding of a sacred holy principle. You are children of God. You are children of God. And even though you're not God, you have the same creative capabilities to a lesser degree as God does. And you have to, and if you understand the principles, you could create lots of cool stuff out of it, but you have to understand the law. You have to understand the law of the land and the way that things work. And killing a baby, sacrificing a goat, murdering a cat isn't going to really do that. It'll certainly do something. You'll certainly get something's attention, but you're not going to get the same principle. It's a misunderstanding of a principle. Right? It's a misunderstanding of a principle. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here. And that's really what the symbol of the square and compass represents. Okay. That was my overview, my quick rundown of Masonry. And the next episode we're going to do is going to be on the first degree tracing board. And there is a lot of information in there. I really highly encourage you to look at it. I'm going to, maybe what I'm going to do is include a link. I'll include a link to my website so you could get a picture of the same one that I'm looking at. Because there's a number of tracing boards out there, and it'd be, if you don't know which specific one I'm looking at, it might get kind of confusing. So that will be excellent to do. All right, I look forward to seeing you next week with the first degree tracing board, and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye. And where's my end button? There it is.